We'll begin tonight thinking about why you like to be scared. You must all like to be scared because you're here. Why tell ghost stories? Why read them or listen to them? Why take such pleasure in tales that have no purpose but comfortably to scare? So I'll let you think about that as I introduce our first reader. Susan Warren is the librarian at the Rideau Public Lakes Library and a well-known storyteller and writer. And welcome, Sue.
Can everybody hear me? Good, good. I might even move it a little closer because I'm short. Welcome. And last year, many of you joined us for a ghost walk where we explored every ghost that there was in the village of Elgin. People coming out of the woodwork literally to scare you out of the cemeteries and the old buildings. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read part of a story and I'll give you a little bit of background. This area is rich in ghost stories and rich in local legends. This one was from Lake Epinican, and I heard it first from my grandfather when I was a child. And there was a ghost boat on Lake Epinican, and there's a lot of opinions about this ghost boat. As a matter of fact, the Flemings and Warrens have been discussing this for about 5 generations now. But a ghost boat would appear on Lake Epinican, a rowboat with young men in it, and it would disappear. And nobody exactly knew what the story was, but people would find it in bays. Now, some people talked about a ghost steamboat, but it would always appear around twilight in the bays around Lake Epinican. And Grandpa did have a story about it, which is part of this story. Very spooky, but there's many more. There's the story of Barrel Point and the Barrel of Gold, and the story of the ghost light on Crossroads, which we used to call Over the Hills Road. There are ghosts. One of my favorite stories, of course, is Poltergeist up on Westport Mountain in the 1930s. And they actually had reporters come down from the Ottawa Journal and even apparently some down from New York State to explore this poltergeist phenomenon, which turned out to actually, the story was be a little boy that was playing tricks, but they were irons jumping down steps and rocks and soup bones flying through windows, and quite a fascinating story. But this particular one is grounded in actual local legend. So I'm going to read it. The protagonist is a lockmaster's wife called Angelina Simmons, who really existed. She was a distant relative of mine. Her maiden name was Warren. And she was one of the families that lived in the lockmaster's house in Chaffees. So, and the story is somewhat true in that she was 48 and she was pregnant with her 9th or 10th child, which in those days did happen. I mean, I can't even imagine it now, but. Anyway, so it's set in Chaffees Lock, and I think everybody here has been to Chaffees for an afternoon. Look at the old mill and check out the now abandoned Pinnacle Hotel. It's called Angel and the Ghost Boat, and I will read for approximately, Jane said, about 15 minutes. So if I don't get it finished, you'll just have to get the book out of the library and read it. Sue Pike, back in 2007, realized there weren't many stories about the Rideau Canal in terms of fiction. There were lots of histories written about the canal. So she went around and talked to various people and invited them to submit stories. So I tend to do nonfiction. As most of you know, I've written books of local history, but I tried my hand at fiction for the first time since maybe I was in my 20s, so bear with me. Okay, Angel and the Ghost Boat. The lockmaster James and his lockmen were smoking their clay pipes, the sparks flying like fireflies over their heads. Across the weir, one could hear the hard grinding of the gristmill stones. The air smelled slightly of flour and burning. Angelina, the lockmaster's wife, walked by the idling man, and if you notice Canal today, it might be appropriate too, and nodded. She was tired, more tired than usual. The hem of her dress dragged in the dust, leaving patterns across the fine gravel. It was an early July evening in 1874 at Chaffee's Lock. She carried a bullseye lantern. During navigation season, someone had to row out with the lantern each evening to the wooden buoy marking the channel of Pinnakin Lake. After dark, the boats used the flickering light to direct them to the lock station. Tonight, Angelina volunteered to do it. It was her escape from the house, from the boaters thronging at the back door asking for water, from the laughter of her daughters as they sat at the kitchen table. Angelina had a secret, one she was not pleased about. On the lake, she could think about it, how to tell James and how to prepare. At the lower lock, she untied the cedar skiff, which was loosely fastened to a post, and pushed herself away from shore using one of the oars. A single blue heron flew over her head. Angelina was 48 years old, mother of 7 living children and grandmother of 5. In December, around Christmas time, she'd be the mother of 8. That was the secret. James would not be happy with the news. The lockmaster's house was crowded enough with 3 daughters still at home. She feared her age. Her own mother had been past 40 when she was born. She didn't even remember the color of her mother's eyes. Sometimes mothers did not live to see children grow. The heron slowly wheeled over the groundlands in the bay. Rowing the boat was calming. Angelina's fine gray blonde hair, usually coiled in a convenient bun, loosened in the breeze and spun across her eyes. The water, the gentle glitter on the lake, the banks of filtering cloud always calmed her. Masses of water weed undulated along the sides of the boat. Since childhood, the lake had been her balm. When her mother died and she was sent to Chaffee's Lock to live with her relatives, she'd spent many hours by the lake shore just watching the rocks, birds, and the fantastic shapes of the fallen trees. Perhaps that's why her sons gravitated to the boats. Her oldest boy, a great mustached man of 30, was already a steamboat captain. After a period of hard rowing, she reached the buoy, a wooden pyramid anchored by iron weights. Carefully, she replaced last night's lantern with a new one and lit the wick with a reluctant lucifer match. The light would be invisible until night covered the lake. As she turned the prow of the skiff towards home, she could hear the non-ending complaints of the loons, complaints or laughter. She could never decide. On the way back to the lock station, the light started to silver as color bled from the sky. On the edge of the drownland, bass were rising and mouthing the water. Angelina paused for rowing. Another skiff was gliding in and out of the stumps and half-standing trees of the bay to the left of the lock. It was unusual to see another boat there. She decided to move in closer, explore a little. Was it a neighbor? A stranger? The young man in the other craft did not acknowledge her. She raised her hand tentatively to wave. He did not wave. Although she did not want trouble, Angelina was a curious woman. She veered her boat hard into the muck of the swampy water to follow him. When she yahooed, he did not answer. He was a skilled oarsman who seemed to know where to avoid the deadheaders, which, for those who don't know, are the logs that rise up and bump up against the boat. When the young man turned his face to her, his expression was as blank as a school slate. She knew who it was, although it couldn't be that person. John Henry Flood, the same age as her, drowned in the fall of the year more than 30 years ago. It could not be John Henry, but it was. She peered through the darkening swamp at the boat, and John Henry Flood dissolved into the swamp air. Angelina was not superstitious. She didn't believe in phantoms. Various Irish neighbors talked of leprechauns stealing milk and banshees wailing, but Angelina didn't believe. A night was a night. A steamboat was a steamboat. On the other hand, she had with total certainty seen her dead childhood playmate John Henry Flood piloting the cedar skiff in the bay of Lake Pinnakin. She remembered him well, a deaf boy with a wonderful talent for carving wooden animals and birds. He often gathered driftwood from the bays to make his creations, trees populated with birds. wagons pulled by lifelike oxen, fish with incised scales. John's parents had owned a bush farm near Davis Lock, an outcropping of granite and white pine with thin soil. After their passing, his older brother had sold it to some Irish settlers. When she docked him up home to the lockmaster's house, James was sitting outside on the sandstone steps of the front porch. Fireflies twinkled and glittered across the grounds and over the coils of mowed hay. Like stars, she thought, sky-full of stars sparking and dissolving. Angel, you look tired tonight. As a young girl, her hair had been finest white sugar in her family, always nicknamed her Angel. I am tired. Do you remember when John Henry Flood drowned? Yeah, but that was so long ago. They never found him, did they? That's right. They looked, but they never found him. Why? I think I saw him in the bay tonight. Are you saying you saw John Henry on the way home tonight? I am saying that. He was in a skiff rowing toward shore, and he looked through me as though I wasn't there. Come with me tomorrow to light the boy, please. James nodded. Angel Simmons was not a frivolous person. He would go. All the next day it rained. Great banks of fog rolled over the upper and lower gates, obscuring the stones and crabs. Sometimes through the wetness, one could hear the angry kwee-kwee-kwee of a wood bird. Angela and her 3 girls set up a quilting frame by the high front window of the house to catch some light as they worked. Although Angelina wore spectacles, she found it difficult to follow the fine stitching. In late afternoon, her youngest daughter, Mary, made tea to help her mother's developing headache. Her thoughts as she quilted were all of John Henry Flood, his thin, lively face, his beautiful, large hands. In 1843, the fall before she'd married James, his overturned boat had been located, drifting across the shoreline near Barrel Point. They never found the body. There was not even a stone or wooden cross to mark his grave. Although he could not hear and never could speak properly, John Henry had used rough sign language with his family, and later with childhood friends. She remembered him teaching her and her cousins some of the signs. After supper, James and Angelina rowed out again to light the evening lantern. As they glided across the lake in the misting rain, she told him about the coming baby. The girls can help you with the child, he said. What else can we do? He was more philosophical than angry. We've had 9 children, Angel. We've lost 2. Perhaps this will give us one back. In the winter before the new Dominion was proclaimed, there was Julius Jamie had died of scarlet fever. As well, she'd given birth to an unnamed baby girl and watched her die during a brilliant January day in 1860. By the time they approached the bay on the way home, both of them were shivering with the damp. The air off the swamps was unhealthy. Old settlers had claimed it caused the terrible fever and ague, which attacked the population in the late summer. Mosquitoes hovered over Angelina's shawled head. James saw John Henry first. Angelina gestured from the prow. John Henry did not acknowledge them, but continued to steer his boat towards the shore. Let's follow him, James. He must be trying to tell us something. And I think my time is almost up. I can stop there. Keep going. It's a ghost story. It was not easy navigating through the root stumps and overturned logs. In the dim light and mist, it was even more difficult. James was a strong and determined oarsman. They managed to keep the other skiff in sight. The far end of the bay was the mouth of a little creek flowing through an artesian spring. John Henry, or his wraith, moved in that direction. Occasionally, the lockmaster's boat banked against a sunken log, but they continued their path. The tangle of dead trees thickened as they neared the shore. In the daytime during midsummer, Angelina knew that the little creek would be lined with scarlet cardinal flowers and towers of bougainvillea. In the mist and gathering night, though, it looked more like the way to hell. John Henry's ghost, for it must be a ghost, stopped suddenly at the shoreline. He stood up in the boat and pointed towards the left side of the creek. Like his original human counterpart, he was a small, lean figure with gigantic hands. When he turned towards Angelina and James, he gestured a sign. Angelina signed back, and then John Henry became one with the fog. What did he sign to you? He told me to go find him. He signed something like, find your seat. Tomorrow when it's light, we'll see what we can find. In the morning, there were delays. By dawn, there were 5 barges and a tug at the upper wharf waiting to be locked through. Angelina had her roast to set from the dough the girls had prepared the evening before. As she punched the pale dough into rounds and fired up the stove in the summer kitchen, she noticed her own impatience to get out on the lake. In the background, the lock gates creaked, and she could hear the voices of the men raised over the rushing water. James was in a hurry. By the sound, she could tell he was locking with the sluices wide open. When the last lockage was done, he left his men in charge and came up the house to get her. She left Julia, her middle girl, finishing the bread. As they rode across the creek, the pinnakin was muted in blue haze, the harbinger of a very hot day. The mouth of the creek was, as she had imagined in the night before, cardinal red and indigo with the rare white shine of a water errand. They disembarked near the area where John Henry gestured the night before. They didn't walk far. Nestled in a hollow beside a birch was a bleached and partly buried human skull. Next to it was a femur. Angela and James looked at each other. It's John Henry. It is John Henry, and he did not drown. Who had hurt him? Who would do this? Using a stick, Angelina managed to extract the skull carefully from the crumbling earth. As she worked, James examined the location. I got you some proof, Angel. Whoever buried him left the knife with him. A few feet from the remains, he found the rusted knife that John Henry always carried with him. On the way to the skiff, Angelina cradled John Henry's bones as carefully as she would cradle her newborn. Who would have wanted to kill that sweet dead boy? There was one suspect in her mind. Lester Flood, the older brother. Lester who kicked dogs and terrorized John Henry. Lester who once burned John Henry's favorite carving in a fireplace. Perhaps he lost his ugly temper that autumn day long ago. Perhaps he had beaten his silent little brother to death and overturned the boat to make it look like a drowning. One could prove nothing. John Henry had been murdered, and there was no justice and no revenge. Throughout the next week, news of the discovery spread like a summer fire to the community. All the farmers on the way to the mail drop by the lockmaster's house heard the story firsthand. The magistrate took the steamer down from Newborough and declared that an inquest was not advisable because of the time lapse. James sent a letter to Lester asking what to do with the remains. Lester, who presently was an upstanding farmer near Delta, did not reply. Eventually, after a month or so, John Henry was interred in the old burying ground near the Lock Station. Reverend Howard, the evangelical Methodist minister from Elgin, arrived by buggy to conduct the service. Angelina's girls gathered a bouquet of goldenrod and asters to place against the wooden cross marked John Henry Flood. On a May evening the next spring, when the wild cherries were just bursting into white, Angelina bundled up her baby girl, laid her in the bottom of the skiff, and rowed out again to light the boy. When she saw John Henry gliding by in the bay, she smiled and continued to row. Many years later, long after James and Angelina passed on, fishermen reported seeing a skiff in the bays of Lake McCann, moving silently among the stumps. When they looked again, the skiff was not there. The end.
Now, our next author is originally from Peterborough, Michael J. McCann. Currently lives in Oxford Station, between Kempville and Prescott. So this is another local author. We'll claim him as ours too, because his book, The Ghost Man, is based in Westport, on the Westport Mountain. He's the author of the Donahue and Stainer crime novel series, which currently includes 4 novels, and has written the first novel in a new series set in Leeds County, which he expects will be published next year as well. His first novel was a supernatural thriller entitled The Ghost Man, which is set in and around Westport. He'll read us excerpts from The Ghost Man tonight. My brother recommended that book to me, and I was reading it and contacted Michael to see if he would come and speak to us tonight. He said, "Is there a passage that you'd like to choose?" I said, "No, it scared me." Michael.
Thanks very much to Jane for inviting me, and for everyone who's assisted with the evening. And thank you to all of you for coming out. It's always nice to see a crowd at an event like this. I've done events where 2 people have shown up. It was very intimate, but very depressing. So it's always nice to see a lot of faces in the room. I'll give you just a brief background on my book, The Ghost Man, before I read a short passage from it. After 15 years as a federal public servant, I took early retirement so I could start writing full-time, which was something that I always wanted to do. But I spent the first year researching my family history. And my McCann ancestors had emigrated from Ireland in the early 1840s, and they settled in North Crosby Township. And so I did a great deal of research. We have to talk.
Yeah, we'll talk.
There are gaps.
There are a lot.
And by the time I was finished, after a year, as you can imagine, I had boxes of material, not only on McCann, but also families that the McCanns married into, and families that married into the McCanns, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I wanted to do something else with this material, and I thought, well, maybe I'll write a history of North Crosby Township and the village of Westport. And then I discovered that Neil Patterson was about to publish a history. And so I thought, okay, well, that's out. And my son said, he was into paranormal television programs and all that kind of stuff at the time. In fact, he still is. He was a member of that Prescott Paranormal.
Oh, okay.
That was at, he was at Chaffee's Lodge with the.
Oh,
with
yeah,
the
he
group.
did the, yeah.
Yeah,
Roy
oh.
was there that night.
That was really cool.
They also came here.
Oh, they did?
Yeah.
Oh, I did not know that.
And I didn't get to recognize.
And they did the mill and
Yeah,
they did another one.
they did the museum in Westport.
That's right.
That's right, they did, yeah, that was.
And didn't they
before my
find a
son
ghost
did it.
called Susan or something?
They found something in
Yeah, how cool is that?
Yeah.
Eh? That's really cool. So my son said, well, Dad, why don't you write a ghost story instead of all this history stuff you want? Why don't you write a ghost story? So I thought about it and said, okay. So that's what I did. And I used some of the historical information that I had researched in the book. But mostly I relied on the research for the atmosphere in which the story is told. So the Ghost Man is a story of Simon Guthrie, who's a former celebrity chef from Toronto, whose life and career is derailed after a very serious car accident. And he moves to this area from Toronto, tries to start a new life. But unfortunately for him, he's become, as a result of the accident, he's become a passive medium, which is someone to whom the stranded ghosts of the deceased are drawn for assistance to cross over to the next world. And he meets a woman named Doris Fowler, who's a history professor from Queen's University. She shows up on his property looking for an abandoned graveyard that she wants to try to find as part of the research that she's doing into a book that she's going to write while she's on sabbatical. So poor Doris gets involved in a lot of these very scary things that are happening around Simon. And Simon is he's afraid that she's not going to believe his explanation about the supernatural events that are occurring around him. But in this short chapter that I'm going to read to you now, she explains to him that she might be a little bit more prepared to believe him than he would think. So, Doris came from a rich family. Her late father was the illustrious Dr. John Kenneth Fowler, J.K. to his friends. Bachelor of Arts from the University of Toronto, M.A. from the University of Chicago, Ph.D. from the University of London, Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, former chairman of the Department of Geography at Queen's University and later at the University of Toronto. The late J.K. passed away when Doris was a second-year undergraduate student. Excuse me. The funeral was attended by a former Prime Minister, 4 university chancellors, and last but not least, His Royal Highness Prince Charles himself, with whom J.K. had corresponded on a number of occasions on issues of mutual interest. Her mother was Myra Schwartz Hurd, the famous art critic, who operated a highly successful art gallery in Toronto. Doris was their only child, and a typical rich kid as she saw it, looking back in hindsight, sheltered, precocious, and wanting for nothing. Unfortunately, though, she'd never been close to her parents. She was a very shy and isolated girl, without close friends to huddle up with to share those intimate secrets young girls like to whisper and giggle about behind closed doors. The people she was most friendly with, in fact, were friends of her parents. I'm explaining things this way, she told Simon earnestly, because I want to tell you about one of my mother's friends in particular. Her name was Heidi Bachmar, and she was famous as a medium to the upper class. She was always very nice to Doris, who remembered the very first serious conversation they had together, when Doris was 15 years old. Her parents were holding a party and Heidi was in attendance. She was in a strange mood, likely because she had just completed the paperwork to divorce her second husband. She had come upstairs to use the washroom on the second floor. Doris was sitting at the bottom of the staircase leading up to the third floor. She was supposed to be downstairs, mingling, but there was no one else down there under the age of 30, and she really didn't feel up to her usual performance as the token child. Coming out of the washroom, Heidi sat down on the stairs beside her. As they talked, Heidi told her about the divorce. Doris asked how she felt about it. Heidi frowned and said she wasn't sure, but she was probably more relieved than anything else that it was finally over. Although marriage and divorce were abstract concepts to her at that age, Doris had herself felt the emotions of estrangement, separation, and aloneness, and knew that solitude could, in fact, be a relief. She gravely told Heidi that she understood. Smiling, Heidi asked Doris whether she was right-handed or left-handed. Doris, puzzled, replied that she was left-handed. Heidi then explained that she could tell a great deal about her just by looking at her palm. She said that she didn't normally read palms for people, as they inevitably assumed that she could foretell their future, which she could not. Palmistry, she said, was the art of reading a person's characteristics and tendencies in the lines on their palms. Our hands tell us about what we have done in the past and what we have the potential to do in the future, she told Doris in a serious tone of voice. She then read Doris's left palm. She told her she was a risk taker and that she needed to be careful with that. Suddenly, she frowned and let go of her hand. I sense something about you, dear. A shadow crosses over your path. It concerns me very much. You have a very strong character, and you'll survive, but you need to be prepared. Heidi always wore a number of different necklaces and pendants whenever she went out. She took one of them off now and showed it to Doris. This is called a hamsa, or a Hamish hand, she said. I wear it always inside my sweater or my blouse. It's a very old type of amulet for protection against the evil eye. Hamish means 5 in Hebrew. See? The 5 fingers on the amulet are said to correspond to the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, and also to the 5 pillars of Islam. It's a symbol that the Jewish and Islamic peoples have in common, and probably predates both civilizations. It's very ancient. Heidi put it around Doris's neck. This talisman will protect you. She whispered a prayer that Doris didn't understand, as her Hebrew was not very good, then kissed Doris on both cheeks and told her she was much loved. This small act of kindness to a young teenage girl, which pleased Doris very much, did not automatically mean that she suddenly believed in the supernatural. She thought the pendant was a cool gift, but she dismissed the palmistry and the rest of Heidi's repertoire as parlor tricks to entertain the rich and bored. She changed her mind, however, while home for spring break during her 3rd year as an undergraduate student. Her mother was going out to pay a social call on Heidi and asked if Doris would come along, which Doris thought was a very unusual request, until she learned that Heidi knew she was home and had asked for her. So I went, Doris told Simon. We had tea and scones. I talked a little about school. She and Mother gossiped. I figured Heidi was gathering intelligence for future seances. The phone rang during their visit and Heidi went off to take the call in the hallway. Doris could hear her voice but not quite distinguish the words. She was obviously trying to defuse a situation of some kind. When the call ended, she came back in and apologized, saying that she would have to leave to see someone who needed her help. She then asked Doris if she would accompany her. Doris agreed. Her mother decided to permit it, and before she knew it, she was in the car with Heidi, being chauffeured to a beautiful stone house in a part of Toronto still dominated by old money, featuring gorgeous 19th century homes, large lots, apple orchards, and well-kept outbuildings. We were there to see a woman by the name of Mrs. Kipley, Doris explained, a client of Heidi's. She lived all by herself in this huge house. She was very stressed and told Heidi that the noises were completely out of control. Heidi walked through the house and stopped in a room that was made up as a downstairs sitting room. This was the nursery, Heidi said. This is where I hear the woman crying, Mrs. Kipley said. But when I come in, there's no one here. The crying stops. This was a nursery, Heidi repeated. There are conflicting feelings in here. Happiness, a sense of joy almost. Shame as well, and great sorrow. A child died in this room. Well, I don't know anything about that, Mrs. Kipley said fussily. It's only ever been a sitting room as far as I'm concerned. My mother did her needlework in here. All I know is that I can't stand the sound of that woman crying. While they were talking, Doris moved around the room with a skeptical eye, examining the wainscoting, the molding, the tin ceiling, the baseboards for any signs of a speaker system, wondering if perhaps someone were playing a prank. She saw nothing obvious. Mrs. Kipley led them into the kitchen and held a finger to her lips. After a moment, they heard a sound coming from below. Heidi walked over to the door leading to the basement and opened it. She stood to one side and gestured to Doris, who came up beside her. Doris heard the sound of a shovel digging in dirt. She felt a chill run through her body. Heidi asked Mrs. Kipley for a flashlight and switched on the basement light. She led the way down a flight of ancient wooden stairs. At the bottom of the stairs, Doris looked around the unfinished basement. The floor was bare soil. The foundation was mortared stone, loose and cracked in some places. The low ceiling was supported by large wooden beams trailing dusty spider webs. There was a wine rack to the right, fairly close, that had only a few dusty bottles on it. There were steamer trunks and boxes in the shadows off to the left. Heidi moved slowly forward. Following, Doris could see a hot water tank and an old stone cistern for rainwater. The sound had stopped. Doris crouched down and checked out the floor. No signs of disturbance. When she stood up, she suddenly felt very cold, as though a door into winter had abruptly opened. Heidi turned, looked at her, and nodded as though the sudden drop in temperature had been expected. Then she pointed behind Doris. Doris turned around. A woman stood about 6 feet behind her, holding a shovel and staring down at the floor. She wore a long dark dress with a high collar adorned with a silver collar pin. Heidi said a prayer in Hebrew while Doris stood stock still, shivering, and then Heidi said another prayer in Latin. The figure turned away as though looking behind her up the stairs and was gone. They went back upstairs. Heidi told Mrs. Kipley there was great sorrow in the basement, spirits that needed to pass. She'd done what she could to help, and Mrs. Kipley might not hear anything further, but she should call if anything else happened in the future. In the car on the way home, Heidi told Doris that an infant had died in the house and was buried in the basement. Perhaps an illegitimate child. It was the young mother who had manifested herself to them in the basement. Heidi had not shared this information with her client, she explained, because Mrs. Kipley was very crusty and prone to rash action. She might sell the property and move away, Heidi said, which was completely unnecessary. Doris would have thought it was a con of some kind, except for the fact that she had seen the woman and heard the digging herself. She felt the temperature, a sudden change that had occurred without any hint of air movement. No breeze or draft at all. It was just suddenly very cold. There was always the possibility that it was a delusion of some kind, that she just imagined seeing a woman with a shovel in her hands. But her gut told her otherwise. On the way home, Heidi asked her if she knew why she'd asked Doris to come with her. "I'm not sure," Doris replied. "Yes, you are," Heidi said. "You want to be a social scientist who feels the dirt between your fingers. You want to search for clues to the past that you can touch and feel and examine under a magnifying glass. You understand, don't you? There's more to the past than that." Doris didn't know any such thing, but said something polite. It was only afterward that she understood what Heidi had been driving at. She wanted Doris to take a more empathetic approach to her work, to be more sensitive to the people whose past she was exploring. History was more than just a compilation of census records, land deeds, journals and letters, more than a chronology of famous accomplishments or the steady march of politics across nations or the rise and fall of religions. It was the breathing in and out of every human being who ever lived on this earth. Some of whom, like an exhalation of breath still lingering in the air, had not yet departed this earth. There are more things in heaven and earth, Doris, than are dreamt of in our philosophy. That afternoon had a profound influence on her career path and her work, especially after she'd done the research and found in the published papers of a local 19th century physician a reference to a 10-month-old infant he treated for a massive infection of the upper respiratory tract. The young woman looking after the infant was the daughter of a prosperous carriage maker who built the stone house now owned by Mrs. Kipley. She claimed the child belonged to a friend who was traveling abroad and would soon return, but Doris suspected that the infant was the young woman's illegitimate child, that he died from the infection and was buried in the basement. Doris often wondered what would have happened if she'd gone back to that house with a shovel of her own. What would she have found beneath that dirt floor? And that's the Ghost Man.
Our next writer has a very interesting website. She says that she has experience in public and expertise in public relationships, in brackets, and communication, planning murders, digging up the bones, and at the very end, a very interesting note. It says she's a truncated chanteuse.
She says that that's another story to tell. I don't know whether
Not tonight.
will killed or not. At any rate, I'm looking forward to hearing Maggie's presentation, because she talks about the lost villages of the St. Lawrence. And I was a little girl when the St. Lawrence Seaway went through, and know a little bit about it. I know a little bit about the lost villages, but I found her books very interesting with regard to the history, as well as mysterious. So I would like to introduce Maggie Wheeler to you now to talk about her books, The Lost Villages, Historical Murder Mysteries. Maggie,
Good evening, everyone. James warned me that the podium is a little wiggly, so there's no pounding the podium tonight, so I'll have to behave. And I'm really happy to be here, and it's wonderful to visit this absolutely amazing old building. It's wonderful. Over the last 15 years, as my writing career has expanded, one of the great treats I've had is that I've been invited to so many small Ontario towns and villages that are so rich in history, and it's been an absolute delight. What I'm going to talk about tonight, I have 3 really tiny stories to share with you tonight, and they're all wrapped around a local legend, local where I come from, and that is the legend of the voices of the lost from the lost villages. Now, this legend is attached to the St. Lawrence River, which is about an hour south of here, in particular the history and geography of the St. Lawrence Seaway and Power Project. How many people here are familiar with the Seaway and or the lost villages that it produced? Good. When I first started 15 years ago, I might get one hand, and it didn't matter the age group either. This is getting much better as we go along. The St. Lawrence Seaway and Power Project ran from 1954 to 1958. It took almost a century of discussion to make it happen. And it was 2 parts, and both parts were connected to one item in the St. Lawrence River, and that was the International Rapids section. And marine navigators had been wanting to find a way to open up that bottleneck for, well, centuries, actually, ever since the French fur traders were coming through. And on the other hand, engineers were looking at those rapids with love in their eyes because they could see the potential for a tremendous amount of hydroelectric power that had not been harnessed yet. Post-war Ontario, 1950s hit, the boom was on and the push was on, both to open up the bottleneck in the river and get rid of the old canal system that had been put in 100 years ago. And also Ontario, like everywhere else, needed power, we needed it now. So finally, after a lot of discussion, a lot of what dragged things on was the fact that it would have to be an international project, something that really hadn't been done on that scale before. And in 1954, they got started. Now, it was the first of its kind. It stands in history as the single greatest engineering project ever undertaken on North American soil in the 20th century, by the sheer size of what they did. The water levels in the St. Lawrence River were affected as far east as Beauharnois Lock in Montreal, and as far west as the Welland Canal at the far end of Lake Ontario. But the section that the legend refers to is the section that was called the Old Front. This mega project, which cost $1 billion, and they came in on time and on budget, can you imagine? They did that today, people would be going, there's got to be something wrong, but they did it. They flooded the lands after to finish the project exactly. They blew the cofferdams 1 minute late on Dominion Day, 1958. But it's a history that it's a job that a mega project that was done. It's over half a century old, and it's still a success story. It still does exactly what it's supposed to do. But big projects have big price tags. And the price tag of this was on our side of the river, and it had to do with the power half. Because what they did to create the power, to harness the power of the rapids, was they built 2 control dams in the river, one around Iroquois and one on the American side. And then they built a massive generating station that stretches, and I'm old so I get to use this, a mile across the river, from Cornwall to Messina. It's the Robert H. Saunders, Robert Moses generating station. And that generating station has 32 turbines in it that since 1958 have been generating 2 million watts of power every single day. They've never stopped, even during the ice storm. And so, again, success, but if you're going to have a generating station, you have to have something behind it called a head pond. And the head pond for that massive generating station, which is the water that they back up and control, because you can't just let the river go crashing through those turbines, the one on the St. Lawrence River is called Lake St. Lawrence. It's the size of the District of Columbia. It's roughly 40 miles long and 4 miles wide at its widest point. And it caused flooding all along a section of Ontario called the Old Front, roughly between Cornwall and Cardinal. And Iroquois still exists. It was in the way, but it was moved completely to 1 mile north of its original location because the control dam was going to go in there. Morrisburg still exists. It lost its 2 streets to the south and its canal, but they simply refaced the village to face to the north where the new highway was going to go through because the old one would be flooded out. But heading east from there were 9 small communities between Morrisburg and Cornwall, 6 villages and 3 hamlets that were basically wiped off the face of the earth. 6,500 people had to be relocated. They moved over 500 buildings. They created 2 new towns that are still villages to this day. They haven't grown to town status yet, north of where that was going in. One is called Ingleside, where I have lived for many years, and one is called Long Sault. And they moved all the people into those towns. But we are talking about an area that's very old. Those villages were established by United Empire Loyalists after the War of Independence in the States. And in the 1950s, the families that were there were still pretty much the same families. So they were losing generational homes and farms. It was like getting a limb ripped off, at least for the older generation. And the final fact I'll tell you is that that first winter after the flooding, which was the winter of 58 to 59, an unusually high number of elderly people in that area passed away before the spring. They couldn't take the shock. They couldn't take living in houses that they were born and raised and married in and looking out windows into a completely new landscape. And one doctor was quoted in one of the textbooks I read that one lady who had moved into Cornwall, she said she died of heart failure, but I could just as easily have said that she died of a broken heart. And so the legend is basically this, that the former villagers so mourned the loss of their homes and their farms, that as they passed on, their spirits went back to the old sites of the old villages. And if you stand on the shore of the St. Lawrence River now, in the evening when the sun is going down, and if the wind is right and your heart is open, you can hear the voices coming to you across the river from the sites of the old towns. Anybody got goosebumps yet? When I posted this on social media, I said goosebumps start at 7:30. Now I've written the Murder Mystery series. There's now 4 books, which is based on this history. It's an amazing history. It's bottomless. It's only technically 4 years, but it is bottomless history. It's been an absolute treat to work with it. And one of the things I wanted to do with the very first book was use this legend, because it's a legend, it's a real legend, and because it's actually more than scary, it's a beautiful legend. It's more sad and tragic than scary, and I wanted to use it. So throughout the first book, and basically throughout the series, the voices come from time to time. They're always an agent that works in a certain situation, and usually about protection. And my heroine in the 4 books really needs protection. She was born and raised in central Ontario, and she has no idea for the first 40 years of her life that her family on both sides actually comes from those villages. Her father was born and raised in Altsville, her mother from Ferens Point. She was raised by her mother, never knew her father. Her mother always told her that her father died in a car accident before she was born. At the beginning of the first book, A Violent End, she, immediately following her mother's sudden death from a heart attack, she finds out that actually her father was murdered. And the reason they know that is because 40 years after the fact, his body has come to the surface. In 1999, we actually had really low water levels on the St. Lawrence. They were crazy low. And where I was living, which was just to the west of the McCann Migratory Bird Sanctuary, and that's where Altsville used to be. It's very shallow, and you could see all kinds of things coming up, old fence posts and sidewalks and so on. And I remember thinking, wow, what if something came up that wasn't supposed to be found, like a body? That's the first thing that would occur to me anyway, and so that was the beginning of the book. That's how they find her father. And so this person who spent her whole life, she's an academic. Does anyone have an academic in the family? I do. They're researchers, they're debaters, they're not socially sensitive. And so she comes into this area that's home, but she's never been there before, to find out who killed her dad. And stirs a lot of pots and steps on a lot of toes. And of course, it gets a little dicey at one point because actually, of course, there's no landscape, there's no crime scene left, right? It's all underwater. She has to go by memories of people that she's connecting with that knew her parents and could maybe help her piece it together. And they do, but one of them's actually her dad's killer. So it gets a little, at one point. But she's always so immersed in trying to find out who her father was because she never knew him. And she sometimes forgets that, yes, there's a killer on the loose, and there have already been, at this point, 2 deaths in the present day. So here we are, we're almost towards the end of the book. She's stirred a lot of pots, stepped on a lot of toes. And what she's decided to do at this point, she's getting nowhere figuring this out. So she decides to go to the bird sanctuary and go to see where the crime scene was. Problem is, it's a year later. The water levels have come back up. She can't get there. If you ever want to go there, what you do is you drive in the bird sanctuary, and when it hangs that deep left to take you to the interpretive center, don't take the left. Keep going. And you'll go out on a bike path, and what you're doing then is traversing the old Altsville Road, and it will take you to the mud flats. But she can't go this time because the water is back up, and she can't get there. So she's not happy, and she's muttering and pacing all the way back up the bike path, and as she comes up to where the old road connects again, she notices for the first time that there's a road heading west off that road. In reality, that little piece of road, which unfortunately every year gets more and more grass on, it's harder and harder to find, was the road that was what we would now call the industrial mall section of Altsville. It was where the train station was, a large general store, and there was a lumber mill, which in the story belonged to Farron's family. And so she notices the road, and she once again intersects with danger and the voices. As I stepped off the gravel path, I noticed something I missed the first time. It was another small road branching off to the west into the trees. I tried to place it in my mind and realized I was somewhere near the site of the old lumber yard. The road didn't go far in, turning into badly overgrown dirt ruts, but I could make out where there had been buildings once. My eye for it was getting better with practice. I found myself in a grove of silver maples, many small ones clustered around a giant mother to them all. The big one clearly dated from before the power project, probably saved because it would be in the sanctuary. I walked around it, noticing that one side had no branches and faded black bark, as though struck long ago by a great calamity. The grove was beautiful and cool, with the sun dipping below the tree line and the evening breeze picking up off the river. And then I knew someone was watching me, and had been for some time. It hit me full body, and I froze, skin listening. Whether I heard or saw to this day, I don't know, but it was something. The prickled hairs in the back of my neck were not from the river's breeze. I tried to write it off as nightmare fallout, but my survival systems were switching on. Not far from where I stood, my father had spent 40 years with the fish, courtesy of someone who could still be very much alive and with me now. Lynn, Strauss, Shad, they all warned me. I cursed myself for being so stupid as to go out there alone. I remained absolutely still for some minutes, unable to move. There was no sound. The wind picked up, giving the trees a menacing sway. And then I heard them. Whispers seemed to come from the trees all around me. Run. I raised my head, trying to decide if they were real or my panic talking, but again, stronger. Run, child, run. I could see no one, not even the watcher. This time unmistakable, many voices, urgently. Danger, go. My body took the initiative, bringing my brain along for the ride. I spun around and ran as fast as I could over the unstable terrain, now barely visible in the deepening shadows. Ignore the knee, make the car, unlock, check back seat, lock, start, reverse, go. Somehow I swiftly backed the car up the narrow hill and out to the safety of the sanctuary road, nearly colliding with a passing van. I swung hard around in a U-turn and headed out to the highway in a cloud of dust. By the time I cleared the woods, I was soaked with sweat and probably needed at least a front-end alignment. What she doesn't understand is, of course, her father came from Allsville. Those are her people talking to her. Well, she understands that she hasn't accepted it yet. I was working on the third book, which was in 2005, and something odd was happening in Ingleside, and this is real. And I lived in Ingleside for many years, one of the two villages that was created from the lost villages. And so it's a mix, like Long Sault, of new bungalows that were built in the 50s, and then we have newer homes to the north, but there are a lot of moved homes in the area that are quite old. And the buzz in the village was that people were starting to see children in the old houses. There were several sightings, and it was coming up on Facebook and so on, and so I thought, okay, I'm going to check into this, it's interesting. And so I called my friend Rosemary Rutley, who wrote the book I'm going to finish with. She's a member of the Lost Villages Historical Society and a local historian. She came from the Lost Villages. And I said, Rosemary, I've been seeing this stuff on Facebook. What's going on? And she said, no, something's going on, and it's just children. And so I can't give you hard data as to how many sightings there were, but it was just one summer. It started, it finished. What it was about, I don't know. But I thought, what a great thing. And so I worked it into the third book. And the third book takes place completely in one house. It's kind of my version of the locked room murder mystery. It's a locked bed and breakfast. The problem is the house is full, but by 6 o'clock in the morning one morning, they realize that one of the guests is never going to come for breakfast. Small problem of a knife in the chest. And so things really get heated and so on. And Inspector Jerry Strauss, who's the OPP inspector in the series, has to go in. And he's got 2 hours to work this out before he either has to let people go or let the Mounties in, because one of the people in the house is a federal minister. Not the one with the knife in the chest, believe it or not. Anyway, what I wanted to do with the business of the children's spirits was I wanted to use that. Sterling House is based on a real bed and breakfast in Ingleside called Nightingale House, and that house was the largest frame home moved during the moving of the villages. It came from the former village of Wales, and it's haunted. So I changed that around a bit too, and I gave Sterling House a child's ghost called Harriet, who was a member of the family back in Wales years ago that fell down a ravine and drowned. And when she appears, or if she's around, you smell violets, they were her favorite, and usually she appears if a child is in danger. So she has started to appear in the house, and in the second chapter, when the murder is discovered, I'm going to read a brief scene between Millie, who owns the house, and her elderly Uncle Hugh, who lives there with her. And this is early before the murder is found. Want my tea, Millie? The woman turned back to find the elderly man half sitting. God love him, she thought with genuine affection. He was a handful at times, to be sure, but if it hadn't been for him 5 years ago, she would have been alone again. Pillows, Millie, he ordered with the unnecessary volume of the hearing impaired. Yes, Uncle. Millie patiently punched and plumped, then propped him up. When she handed him the tea mug, he grabbed her free hand and held it tightly. I saw her again. Despite the trembling chin, the old man's eyes were clear and held the first trace of fear she had ever seen in them. She's not supposed to be here. Something's wrong. Who? The girl. There is no girl here, Uncle Hugh. Sitting down on the bed, she patted his hand. Only adults. We don't take children, remember? I saw her, he snapped back. Same one as last week. There's someone here who's not supposed to be here. We have to find her. Mildred sighed. The story of Sterling House being haunted had lingered since its day in Wales. At the time she bought the house, it had seemed fun and fanciful to play it up in promotions. But right now, she wasn't so sure it had been a good idea. But at least he wasn't on to the threat of her losing the house. Drink your tea, she said in her best bedside manner. Still came natural, even after years of retirement from nursing. I'll be back. I have to get dressed and wake the guests. It's almost 6 o'clock. She rose to leave. And then the murder is discovered. Basically, all hell breaks loose. And we visit with everybody, and Jerry gets the call. After 18 hours, he's 6 o'clock in the morning, he's just getting home, and he has to basically get dressed again. And then we go back to somewhere inside Sterling House. And somewhere in the old house, the girl stood listening in the dark. "Something is wrong," she whispered over her shoulder. "We have to stay here. You can't be seen." Turning to look at the person behind her, the girl slowly shook her head. "You cannot leave right now. I will keep you safe. It's death," she added softly. "Death has come to the house again." I'm just looking at my time. I'm going to scoop just a couple. I've got a couple more minutes. The third one I'm going to read is a very short story that actually isn't mine. I wish it was. Because I absolutely love it. And it's in Rosemary's book. It's called Voices from the Lost Villages, but the title is a play on the legend. This is actually nonfiction, and it's a wonderful history book. Rosemary took time to interview people that had grown up and gone through the Seaway and moved with the Seaway, and so that's what the voices are. But in the very back of the book, her daughter Glenda added a short story that directly refers to the legend. And Rosemary puts in a little paragraph about what the legend is and why, about the fact that we lost so many elderly people that first winter. And so in honor of that, Glenda wrote this story, which is basically the beginning of the legend. And so I'm going to read it to you. And I'm really going to try hard in the last two paragraphs to not get choked up, because it gets me every time. But we'll see how we do this time. "I agree with the old woman who lives in this house that it is risky to stay. Neither of us understands what will happen to me once the house is gone, but I will take the risk because I do not know what will happen to me without divine means. She keeps talking to me about how we will have to leave. She does not understand that I will not be following her. She talks of the water and how it will cover the land and how the houses will be moved or destroyed. She thinks that just because the houses are moved, the spirits will quietly move too, but she is wrong. The timid ones may comply with the decisions of the living, but I will not leave. The timid ones don't know that it will be difficult for them there in the new villages, because the power company has agreed to build neat new towns and take the houses off their foundations and put them onto new footings. Because they have tried to appease the living and make the move as easy as possible, does not mean that the spirits also are going to move away from the river. Those that do will have a difficult time. This is not going to happen to me, for I will not leave. The bindings to the old road stretch deep into the soil. If the spirits move on with the houses, the bindings will be severed. I was there in the kitchen when the property agent came to talk to her about the purchase of the land. I heard him tell of the more than fair price they would pay so they could flood, cover the farms and towns with water to make the St. Lawrence River mightier than it already is, deeper so that the big ships can pass, and dam it up so there would be electric power for thousands, even millions of people. I heard the sleek rhetoric he used to convince her that the events of the future were infinitely more important than the events of the past. She tried to speak for me then, to explain the ties to the old world. He nodded yes, they understood how many generations worked the land, each pushing back the bush, pulling and burning the stumps. They understood her wanting to protect the land. They understood her loyalty to the people before her. Yes, they knew of the great strides and profound progress made with each generation, and this was her opportunity to carry on that tradition of growth and progress. And it would happen now. She would see this great engineering feat in her own lifetime. Think, he said, edging the purchase papers across the table toward her. Think of the great thing you will be witness to. I wanted then to interject on our behalf for the spirits. I wanted to tell him of the things that we had witnessed in many lifetimes, but the agent knew nothing of the spirits, and my hollow voice in the kitchen would only have sent him away in fear. I was powerless to change anything. They could make the living leave, and the timid spirits might also move along, but I would not go. She watches the old woman, and she sees them cutting the huge trees from along the streets in town, watches black plumes of smoke rise into the sky from burning buildings that cannot be moved. One day she sees a house move along the road out to the highway and the new town site. The curtains still in the windows flutter slightly as the house passes. It sits on the large trailer, intact, just as it sat on the farm down the road. She half expects the neighbor woman to pull back the curtains and wave as the house passes, but this doesn't happen. From what people tell her, the ones who have already made the move, that neighbor woman might well be back in her kitchen by supper time, and if all goes well, her husband's supper will be sitting on the table when he comes home from work. See, the power company people tell them, see how easy we will make the move for you, and wait, just wait until you begin to share the wealth the Seaway and Power Project will bring. What they do not say is that after the man eats his supper, that his wife is prepared for him, and he goes out onto his porch to watch the sun sink behind the trees will not be there. And the air will be silent and dry because the Long Sioux Rapids no longer roar in front of his house. I know of things the power company people do not, because the old woman and the stronger spirits, like the Mohawk, tell me. The Mohawk knows better than all the spirits what is happening here. He is weary with change and the anguish of progress. He is not afraid as the white spirits are, but he is angry. The Mohawk tried to convince the timid ones to stay. In the beginning, he did not understand their reluctance to leave the houses, but when they dammed the river and the long Sioux dried up, he saw then how it was for the timid ones, and he mocked them no more. We heard him wail when the water stopped rushing over the rocks in the mighty Sioux. Even some of the living could hear the screams that came from the silenced riverbed. And it was the damming of the rapids that convinced me not to move on with the house and the old woman. When I saw what happened to the Mohawk, I had great fears, and though I do not have his strength, I will hold on to the land that remains as he has and wait. The old woman has begun to prepare for the house mover. They told her there was really very little for her to do. Take everything off the shelves and tables just in case, they said. Everything in the cupboards and cabinets would be fine. But she is so worried, she is taking her mother's fine dishes out of the china cabinet anyway and wrapping them in newspaper and packing them in boxes. She can't bear to lose more than she already has. She tells me things, the old woman. She tells me that she is afraid of what will happen to me, but she's confused much of the time and doesn't know the things she fears for me are really what she fears for herself. I'm confused as well because I've never been convinced that she in fact does see me. There was a time when I believed I was simply a spectator to her rambling thoughts, but now I feel she's speaking directly to me. She is confused. The old woman has been out to the new town site to see the lot where they will put her house, and she's talked with people who will be her neighbors. I know she's at least thankful they are not strangers, and they have tried to console her. From experience, they tell her that the move will be easier than she thinks. But we do miss the crabapple tree that used to shade the kitchen window, they say. We planted another, but we will probably be dead by the time it grows large enough to send a sweet-scented breeze into the house. It is her new neighbors who drive out to pick her up and take her back to the new town on the day the house is to be moved. She is old, of course, but I have never thought of her as frail until today. When they walk out to the car, I notice that the neighbors walk on either side of her, the hand on her elbow. Why she allows them to do this, I do not know. She has never needed help before. The house-moving machine with its heavy beams will soon lift the house off its foundation. They sit in the car for a very long time, the old woman and her neighbors, and I think that perhaps they will wait and see how this is done, but they drive away slowly. And when the hydraulics begin lifting, I know why the Mohawk wailed as he did when the long Sioux became dry. The work crew hear my cries, but what they think it is the growing creak of the timber and the shifting of the frame. Without the walls of the house around me and the woman's presence, I have no sense of time, so I do not know when the waters will come. The spirits that have stayed behind are unsettled, flitting here and there, and not knowing where they belong. The explosions are the first sign that the waters are coming. The dams that have been holding it back have been blown. The sluice gates of the generating plant are closed, and the waters of the St. Lawrence creep up its banks. We, like the living, have come to watch and had expected it to rush out over the land. We believed it would be all over in a matter of hours, but this is not the case. It takes days for the water to completely cover the land, and several more days for the spirits to accustom themselves to the new river. And with the Mohawk there to lead the way, we soon find that our movement is not hampered by the water, but enhanced by its buoyancy. The Mohawk stays near the Sioux. They have lost their power, but they are still there. The mighty raging flow of the water has been stemmed, but is still the place where he belongs. Okay, we're down to the last 2 paragraphs. Let's see if I can do this. I go back to where the house once sat, and I wait. I do not know why I wait, but it seems to be the right thing to do. Soon the submerged land begins to look like it did before the work began, before the trees were cut and buildings moved. And then I see her coming. Not down the road, but over land. Across the field she comes, running on her frail old legs. Now when she looks at me, I know that she sees me. She talks directly to me. There are others coming, she says. I have seen them, and they are on their way. Thank you.
I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions before we finish, and I know that you're working on a new book. Yes. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
My next novel, I'm starting research on it, and I'm hoping that I can use the characters from the first 4 books, because I miss them. It's been 5 years since I've sat down to write a book. But the history I want to focus on this time is the history of the British home children. And I don't know how many, but I'm sure you have families in this area who are descendants of home children, because apparently the stats on that is 15% of our society today in Canada are descendants of home children. The British home children, for those who don't know, were between 100 to 130,000 children that left the British Isles between roughly 1869 and 1940. For good reasons. They were either impoverished on the streets or they were orphaned. And several agencies did this. But they basically shipped them to the colonies. Canada took the most of them. And they came to us as children and went into service until they were 18, and then they were allowed to go on and lead their lives. It's quite a story. My grandmother was a home child, so this time it's a lot more personal. She came across in 1914. She was 10 years old.
A new mystery series. I've written 4 novels so far in the Donahue Stainer series, which we had here tonight. And I've taken a certain amount of flack because we're set in the United States, you know, from people like Barbara Fradkin, who likes to give me a hard time about setting my stories in the US of A. And I have like good explanations for it, but I got kind of tired of the whole thing. So I started a new series, and I finished the manuscript of the first novel in the series. And it's going to be set here in Leeds County, using homicide investigators with the OPP. So the first one is set predominantly in Young Township. And the second one, I'm just starting to write the outline for it now, and I'll be writing the manuscript this winter. And it's set here. Randomly, it was a random choice, but the murder's going to happen in Elgin.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, that'll give you something to look for.
We'll get that from the library.
And I have a question for Michael and Maggie. How do you recognize when you're finished with the story? You've written series, but how do you know when you're finished the first book?
Well, for me, when I wrote the first book, I thought it was going to be the only book. That was, I thought if I can finish this thing, it's going to be a miracle. And it ended up that it got published, and people would come to me and say, because I didn't have a fairy tale ending at the end, and there's a bit of a love thing going on and stuff. And he said, you can't just leave the characters hanging, we need to know what happens. And so I started thinking, maybe I could do this again. And certainly, as I said, the Seaway is bottomless for history. The stories that were shared with me and the ones that I uncovered are just, goes on and on. So I certainly had a lot of material left over. So and then I just started to, it was 4.
Before you do it.
Before I knew it, now I'm back.
Oh, that's nice. And Michael?
When I first started the Donahue and Stainer series, I wrote kind of an overview of the series as a whole and sketched out 5 different novels actually that I saw that could fit into it, knowing that good ideas can come at any time, and you can just slot them in, so basically I can keep going until they carry me out on a plane. But so far there are 4, and the 5th one is still to come. If I ever go back to the States. But that's
She's in trouble.
she is. She's scary.
She's scary. Barbara Fradkin is scary.
Yeah.
Nice scary.
Yes, but basically that's what I do with a series, and then with each novel, of course, I write an outline that describes the beginning and the middle and the end of that particular story.
Okay.
So that I know how each story ends before I start to tell it, which is key for me because I write procedurals, and I need to know how it's going to end because I need to manipulate the evidence and all that kind of stuff, right? To manipulate the investigation so that it ends up where it's supposed to end up.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Maggie, one of the things I was wondering, the area that you write in, have you ever thought of including Chrysler's Farm?
Well, actually, in the 4th book, it takes place in the past. Each of the books operates the same way. The first murder is in the past during the Seaway, and it's discovered in the present day, and then of course its discovery starts, more murders and so on. With the 4th book, because we were heading towards the bicentennial, I actually had a 3rd chapter of history start first in Iroquois, which had just before the Battle of Chrysler's Farm. And it's about lost gold and so on, gold doubloons, which is an interesting piece of our Canadian history that very few people know, but we actually did have Spanish doubloons as part of our currency at one point. And so I did wrap that in, and the 4th book is finished. Each of them has appendices in them with more history about certain things, and the last one has one written on the War of 1812 and the impact on that
because of course there was Chrysler's Farm, but they came ashore first, they worked their way down there. But it's interesting as I watched over the bicentennial, in the area, Chrysler's Farm was well celebrated, but generally speaking, in the history that's online and published, Chrysler's Farm is always seen as
A footnote.
a footnote.
Yeah,
And that's
like
where
they cleaned their
everything
clocks.
changed.
Yeah.
We had one Chrysler's Farm, we all the Americans had.
Yeah,
And most
Yeah.
people don't realize that.
yeah.
And we were outnumbered 4-1. And you can't say that. Almost American, I won't say that. You know what I mean?
Okay, well, what an interesting evening we've had tonight. What a rich number of stories and history you've brought to us. And on behalf of the Society, I'd like to thank you all, Susan, Michael, and Maggie, for coming tonight, first of all, and for sharing these stories with us and making such a wonderful presentation. And audience, thank you. There's coffee and lemonade and cookies at the back. So,
Tea.
And tea, and books here at the front. So relax, you have a chance to talk to the authors. I'm sure they're willing to talk to you.